This is a national crisis. It's of national crisis proportions.
Nearly 24 million Americans have diabetes, and the number is not expected to go down anytime soon. That's the sobering reality, according to the American Diabetes Association. Assemblymember Joe Coto is well aware of this reality. That's why he's led the effort legislatively to raise awareness about the disease. Through a legislative resolution, he created and chaired the Legislative Task Force on Diabetes and Obesity. The results?
We came up with a series of recommendations that are now being implemented by other members of our caucuses.
Some of those recommendations resulted in new laws banning trans fat, requiring nutritional information to be displayed on the menus of restaurants, and prohibiting the sale of sodas in K-12 schools. In the hearings, the testimony of one of 3 witnesses particularly impressed Coto. The witness was a nurse.
She was a diabetic, and she was on insulin. And we asked her, what message do you want to send to your daughters who now have children themselves? And she looked at me in the eye and she said, I would want to tell them that they're killing their children by not feeding them appropriately, by using too much grease in their food, by not changing our habits, our eating habits.
Dorothy Rogers knows how challenging changing eating habits can be. She's a diabetic, and so are her 2 sons.
It's my fault too, because it's what I cooked. All the foods that I cooked was the wrong type. It was starchy, carbohydrates and all that. So they're learning to eat better, and I'm learning to eat better.
Dorothy is not alone, though. For many, particularly in the groups most vulnerable to diabetes, like Latinos and African Americans, food and how we prepare it can often be seen as part of a tradition that experts say can be deadly.
It's the 5th leading cause of death by disease in the U.S., but a lot of the number 1 cause, which is heart disease, is a result of diabetes.
Unhealthy eating and physical inactivity are leading causes of obesity, which is a major cause of diabetes. But it's not just that.
It's not just obesity, and I think some of the patients who you might interview are going to perhaps be surprised. The one in particular who I mentioned, who's had all the complications of his diabetes, is not obese. And in fact, he was very active in a physical job, but had basically a very bad genetic background, and that's a problem for a lot of nuestra gente, that we have a very strong genetic tendency towards diabetes. So even though he was physically active, he was not obese. He got diabetes probably by his mid to late 30s, but obesity just makes things worse.
Genetics was the culprit for Maria Torres.
I was vegetarian for 30 years. I don't eat meat, I don't eat sugar, I don't eat flour, a lot of these things. I never use it, but my father was diabetic, so I think I get this from my father's genes.
Genes also affected Dorothy. Remember, she and her 2 sons have diabetes.
I have a son 40 now, and I have a son that will be 33 in March. And the 40-year-old was diagnosed like maybe 3 years ago, and my 33-year-old, he was diagnosed maybe 5 years ago. So it runs in the family.
Dorothy was diagnosed in her 30s.
I was diagnosed approximately 37, 38. I'll be 57 this year in May, so it's approximately 20 years. When I was first diagnosed with diabetes, I really did not change my eating habits. I still did what I wanted to do, and when I had a kidney infection when I was 40, and I was hospitalized for a week, and I was out of work for 2 months and a half. And after that, that's when it really hit me to straighten up and fly right. And I did start watching my food intake.
If you have a tendency to diabetes and you gain weight, or you start gaining weight when you're young, the likelihood is you're going to get diabetes younger, you're going to have more complications of it, and you're going to shorten your life.
Something that makes the impact of diabetes even more dangerous is the fact that many people affected don't even know they have diabetes. That's the case for about 6 million people in the country.
Lack of knowledge and denial. People don't want to think they have a problem, especially if they don't feel bad. And the thing about diabetes is that if you feel bad, by the time you feel bad, you're likely to have had some serious damage. The American Diabetes Association recommends that just everybody be screened for diabetes starting at age 45. And then we do that just as a routine thing every 3 to 5 years. But I have a lot of people who have a very strong family history of diabetes, so I start screening them younger and screen them a little more often.
Aside from the lessons learned from his legislative work, Assemblymember Joe Coto continues to work to raise awareness about the disease because he knows firsthand the impact of diabetes on a loved one.
My mother was on dialysis, and I used to see her initially, taking insulin, and watching her arms become red and dark skin color blotches all over her arms because she was, providing herself some insulin. Later on, she was placed on dialysis, and as a result of that, she died at a much younger age than she should have died because of the complications of diabetes and obesity.
Coto is now worried about new statistics that show that diabetes is affecting more children than ever before.
It's a generation of young people that are going to be exposed and are going to be diabetic.
The thing we're all afraid of, those of us who deal with diabetes every day, is that this is going to give us a generation of kids who are going to live shorter lives than their parents. Up till now, lifespan keeps going up and up. Every generation seems a little bit longer, but we see kids 14, 15 years old getting type 2, adult type diabetes. I don't know what's going to, by the time those kids are in their mid-30s, they're going to have had diabetes for 20 years. They may be losing their eyesight. They may be going into kidney failure. They're not going to live to 75. That's insane. It's terrible.
But in the midst of what the American Diabetes Association calls an epidemic, it's important to remember that you can do something to prevent it and that diabetes can be treated, especially if diagnosed early.
If you don't have diabetes, I don't think you pay close attention to every single thing you put in your mouth. But if you have diabetes, you really have to. You probably don't do your own blood test on yourself 2 or 3 times a day, but if you have diabetes, you have to do that. So it's a lot of work.
You hope that they walk away with the understanding that they can control their own destiny, that they have the ability to make a difference in their quality of life.
This report was produced by the Speaker's Office of Member Services.